Moving into my new neighborhood, I expected some peace and quiet. After all, I just wrapped up a year-long undercover sting operation, busting a major drug ring, and I was looking forward to some time off before my next assignment. What I didn't expect was a power-hungry HOA president named Karen, who patrolled the streets like she was the sheriff of a one-stoplight town. The moment I pulled into my driveway, she was there, arms crossed, lips pursed, and a clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," she said in that shrill, condescending tone that made my detective instincts tingle. "This is a private community with very strict HOA rules. I don't recall approving a new resident." I sighed, stepping out of my car. "I'm Daniel Carter. I just bought this house. The paperwork's all done." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Oh, well, I'll have to verify that with the HOA board. In the meantime, you should know we have regulations. Your grass must be no taller than 2 inches, trash bins must be hidden from view at all times, and no street parking overnight." I glanced at my lawn, perfectly trimmed, my trash bins tucked neatly behind the fence, and my car parked in my driveway. "Sounds reasonable," I said. Karen squinted. "We'll see." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a violation notice taped to my door. Fine, $200, unauthorized vehicle in driveway. I chuckled. This woman was serious. I walked outside, and sure enough, Karen was on her golf cart, glaring at me like a hawk. "You're new, so I'll be generous," she said. "If you pay within 24 hours, I'll waive the late fee." I gave her my best cop smile, the one that usually made criminals second-guess themselves. That's funny because I checked the HOA guidelines and there's no rule about parking in my own driveway. Karen's eye twitched. "Well, it's an unspoken rule." "Ah, an unspoken rule with a $200 fine?" I crossed my arms. "I'd love to see that in writing." Karen's face flushed red. "You should really learn how things work around here," I smirked. "Oh, trust me, Karen, I always do my homework." I knew she was up to something, but I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. Later that week, I came home to find two uniformed officers waiting for me. "Sir," one of them said, "we received a report of suspicious activity at this address." I raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity?" The officer looked uncomfortable. Yes. The HOA president reported illegal substances on the premises." I blinked. "She what?" Karen was standing nearby, arms folded, smirking like she'd just won the lottery. Oh, she had no idea who she was messing with. The two officers shifted uncomfortably as they stood on my porch. I could tell they weren't exactly thrilled to be here. False reports waste police time, and by the looks on their faces, they knew this was probably one of them. "Mind if we take a look around?" one of them asked. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Sure, but before you do, I'd love to know who filed this report." The officer hesitated, but Karen stepped forward with a smug grin. "I did," she said. "I saw suspicious packages being delivered to this house at odd hours. Given the state of our world today, I thought it was my civic duty to report it." Suspicious packages? I nearly laughed. She must have seen my Amazon orders, probably protein powder and dog food. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level, "do you have any evidence that I'm doing anything illegal?" Karen's grin widened. "I don't need evidence. That's what the police are for." Oh, this was going to be fun. I stepped back and gestured for the officers to enter. "Go ahead. Search away." They exchanged looks, then proceeded inside. I watched as they awkwardly checked my spotless kitchen, my neatly arranged living room, and my home office, complete with my police badge sitting right on the desk. One officer picked it up, then looked back at me. Daniel Carter? Detective Carter?" I nodded. "That's me." The officer exhaled loudly and shot his partner a knowing glance. "You're an undercover cop?" I shrugged. "Off duty at the moment, but yeah." Karen's smug expression vanished like a fart in the wind. "What? That can't be right. He's lying." The second officer sighed and turned to her. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a crime." Karen's face turned an unnatural shade of red. But I really thought." The first officer cut her off. "Do you know how serious an accusation like this is? Wasting police resources? Harassing a law-abiding resident?" Karen started sputtering. "I was just doing my job as HOA president." The second officer turned back to me. "Detective Carter, do you want to press charges for the false report?" I stared at Karen, watching the panic creep across her face. She thought she had all the power in this neighborhood. She had no idea I was about to turn her world upside down. I smirked. "Not yet. but I think I'll be keeping a close eye on this HOA. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't do that. Oh, I can. I folded my arms, and I will. The officers left, but not before giving Karen a final warning. She stormed off, but I knew this wasn't over. No, this was just the beginning. I expected Karen to back off after nearly getting charged for filing a false report. But Karen wasn't just any HOA dictator, she was a special breed of petty. The next morning, I walked outside to find my car booted. A neon orange violation notice was slapped onto the windshield, along with a $500 fine for repeated parking violations. I sighed. Really, Karen? She was already there, standing at the end of my driveway with her arms crossed. You were warned, she said smugly. Street parking is prohibited. I gestured to my car. It's in my driveway. Karen shrugged. Driveways are considered part of the community's aesthetic. We can't have ugly cars ruining property values. I stared at her. It's a brand new Dodge Charger. Karen's smirk widened. And yet, it's not a beige sedan like the rest of the neighborhood. I exhaled through my nose. She was trying to push me. And while I wanted nothing more than to slap a pair of cuffs on her right then and there, I had something better in mind. Smiling, I pulled out my phone and made a quick call. Hey, Paul, I need a favor. Got an illegally placed vehicle boot on my car. Mind sending someone down? Karen's smirk faltered. Who's Paul? I grinned. Oh, just a buddy at the police impound lot. He deals with unauthorized car boots. Fun fact, you can't just slap one on someone's car without legal grounds. That's called vehicle tampering. Karen's face twitched. This is an HOA matter. Not when you're breaking the law, I said cheerfully. 15 minutes later, a tow truck pulled up along with Officer Paul Matthews. He stepped out, took one look at my car, then at Karen. Let me guess, HOA nonsense? Karen bristled. This is private property. You have no jurisdiction here. Paul ignored her, pulled out his clipboard, and started writing. You're being cited for unlawful vehicle immobilization. He slapped the ticket into Karen's hand. And unless you want a lawsuit, I suggest you remove that boot before I have your HOA fined. Karen's face was the color of an overripe tomato. This is harassment, I smiled. No, Karen, this is me playing by the rules. She yanked the boot off my car, threw it into her golf cart, and sped off, nearly running over a neighbor's lawn gnome in the process. Paul shook his head. You always find the fun ones, don't you? I laughed. Oh, you have no idea. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. If there was one thing I'd learned in my years as a cop, it was that people like her never quit. And sure enough, later that night, I got a notification from my security camera. Karen was outside my house with bolt cutters. I sat up in bed, watching the live feed from my security cameras. There she was, hunched over my fence with a pair of bolt cutters, trying to snip the lock on my backyard gate. I took my time getting ready. I wasn't in a rush. She was too busy committing a felony to notice me. Slipping on a hoodie, I grabbed my badge and phone before stepping outside. Late night stroll, Karen? I called out. She gasped, nearly dropping the bolt cutters. What are you doing out here? I leaned against my porch railing. I live here. Question is, what are you doing out here? Karen straightened, smoothing her cardigan like she hadn't just been caught red-handed. I was conducting an HOA inspection. At midnight? Yes, she snapped. We received complaints about an unauthorized structure in your backyard. As HOA president, I have every right to inspect it. I crossed my arms. You mean my tool shed? Karen huffed. If that's what you call it. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her. You know what I call this, Karen? Breaking and entering. Her eyes widened as she saw the security footage. You recorded me? She shrieked. I grinned. You bet. And you're trespassing. Karen's face contorted into something ugly. You can't do anything to me. I'm the HOA president, I sighed, stepping off the porch. You keep saying that like it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. She scoffed. Oh, please. You won't call the cops. That would be a conflict of interest. I smirked. Karen, I am the cops. Her mouth fell open, and I pulled out my badge, holding it up so she could get a good, long look at it. Detective Daniel Carter, undercover officer, I said. And right now, I have enough evidence to charge you with trespassing, destruction of property, and attempted theft. Karen's face drained of color. Theft? I gestured to the bolt cutters still in her hands. Were you planning to take my shed, or just the lock? She dropped the cutters like they were on fire. This is a misunderstanding, is it? I asked, because I'm starting to see a pattern here, false police reports. illegal car booting, and now breaking and entering. Karen swallowed hard. Look, let's be reasonable. I'm an important figure in this community. I nodded. Sure, and I'm an important figure at the police department. She laughed nervously. This doesn't have to escalate. Maybe I could. Just then, flashing blue and red lights lit up the street. Karen turned to see two patrol cars pulling up, and her breath hitched. I smiled. Oh, did I forget to mention? I already called this in. Karen let out a strangled noise. You set me up. I shrugged. I just gave you the rope. You hung yourself. The officers stepped out, and I could already see the wheels turning in Karen's head. She was about to learn the hard way that HOA rules don't override actual laws. Karen's stood frozen in place, her eyes darting between the approaching officers and me. She looked like a cornered animal, and for the first time since I'd moved in, she was completely speechless. Evening, Detective Carter, one of the officers greeted me, glancing at Karen. This the trespasser? I nodded, caught her trying to break into my backyard with bolt cutters. Got the whole thing on camera. Karen let out a nervous laugh. This is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to enforce HOA regulations. The officer raised an eyebrow. At midnight? With bolt cutters? Karen's face twitched. You don't understand. He's been breaking rules left and right. He parked the wrong car in his driveway. He has a shed that violates HOA standards. I tilted my head. You mean the shed that was already there when I bought the house? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The officer turned back to her. Ma'am, do you have any legal right to be on this property? Karen crossed her arms. As HOA president, I have jurisdiction over all properties in this community. The officer blinked. That's not how that works. Karen's face turned scarlet. You have no idea who I am. The officer sighed, already done with her nonsense. Actually, I do. We've received multiple complaints about you over the years. Harassment, illegal fines, and now breaking and entering. I smirked. Looks like all those unspoken rules don't hold up in court. Karen's confidence cracked. Wait, I didn't mean to break the law. I shook my head. You tried to get me arrested on false charges, and now you're the one in cuffs. That's karma. Her eyes widened as the officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. You can't arrest me. I'm HOA royalty. The officer deadpanned. Ma'am, put your hands behind your back. Karen shrieked as the cuffs clicked into place. This is police brutality. I'll have your jobs for this. I laughed. Oh, you're going to love the irony of this next part. Karen turned to me, her face a mask of rage. You did this. You ruined my life. I shrugged. Nah, Karen. You did that all by yourself. As the officers read Karen her rights and escorted her to the squad car, neighbors began peeking out of their houses, watching the spectacle. Some of them even clapped. One elderly man from across the street grinned at me. Been waiting years for someone to take her down, I nodded. Happy to be of service. As Karen was shoved into the back of the police car, I walked over and leaned down to the window. By the way, Karen, you're officially banned from my property. You know, since you love rules so much. She let out an ear-piercing scream as the door slammed shut. I watched the car drive away, then turned to my house. Finally, peace. And best of all, the HOA was about to be very short one tyrannical president.